is that we are going to move on to the big topic of the show. Now, this one is a two-tiered monster because what it does is it aligns Phil Spencer with Satya Nadella. Now, there's been some talk in the community that, that Satya doesn't understand games. Well, I don't know if he even plays games, but he understands business. And because of his understanding of business and his trust in Phil Spencer, well, Phil Spencer literally saved Xbox with a conversation. We all know that to be true. And they had two different interviews at two different times. And even though they don't reference one another, they align with where Xbox is going. And the first part of it is I want to talk about lastly, because I've talked about this pretty much all week because it was such a lengthy, beefy 36 minutes that the guys at Xbox Era got a chance to hang out with Phil Spencer, and he answered a lot of questions and really did speak his mind. I'm going to go right back to Silent Cypher. Silent, look, there's a lot to get into with this particular topic. Now, I pulled this story from TrueAchievements.com. It was written by Tom West. Now, this was posted a couple of days ago, but it's an important topic because of what happened yesterday with Satya Nadella and his commentary about the importance of having a stout AAA library for Xbox, and he specifically said that. But the title of the article says Xbox wants to continue supporting story games within Xbox Game Pass, and it says as many publishers are now focusing on live service, Xbox boss Phil Spencer wants Game Pass to be a great space for self-contained story-based games with a clear ending. And it goes on to say, while many publishers are turning to the live service model to recoup increased development costs, Xbox wants to continue to support story-based games with Xbox Game Pass. Phil Spencer says part of the reason Microsoft wanted to create a subscription service was to support games with a beginning, middle, and end, like the upcoming exclusive South of Midnight. In a recent interview with Xbox Era, Phil Spencer spoke about Xbox Game Pass and that part of the reason Microsoft really wanted to create a subscription service was so it could support games with a clear ending. And I have a couple of quotes here from Phil. And again, if you have not watched the interview with Xbox Era, I highly ask that you go check it out, not only to support John, Special Nick, and Jesse, and the team that works over at Xbox Era, but it really was a damn good review. A lot of fun, very light, and a lot of really big questions were answered by Phil. Well, here are a couple of statements from him regarding what we're talking about. He said, I said years ago, I kind of got some tomatoes thrown at me about the impact of first-party games have in our industry, and it was really this struggle that I saw for the business results. It's obviously been huge for single-player games. There's no doubt. But part of the reason for trying to get a subscription going was to allow us to also support games that have a beginning, middle, and end. I think that the synergies between I want to play a game, indie's not a small game, but like say indie, and then I'm finished, Avowed is coming. And I think what he's referring to is basically, okay, so indie isn't a small game, and it's not. It depending on how much you put into the game as well. Like I said about Avowed, the more you put into the game, the more the game rewards you as the player. Indiana Jones is very similar on what you can find, the secrets that you can find. Well, his second quote is, I love the event from our Dev Direct. All of those were single player games. They were all games that have a beginning, middle, and end. And it's because I didn't want to see every game turn into some big service-based game because they felt like that's where the business model was. It's not easy to do that. Not every story is told in that way. Not every game kind of that supports that or have a creative idea supports that kind of a business model. So here, where I really get excited about this particular story is more so that these single player games that the Xbox community, people like me, I love single player, story driven, adult theme type of games. If you look at the roadmap that Xbox has provided to us, Silent, it does seem that they're going to deliver that. Now, I do want to add the second story to this because obviously we're already at the hour mark, so I'm going to give you both stories rather than to come back around to it. Now, the second story comes to us from purexbox.com. It was written by Ben Kerry. Now, this is what Microsoft CEO commits to producing great quality games as Xbox expands. Now, the story basically says the discussion about Microsoft's current business ventures led the chatter about Muse AI, which, if you didn't know what Muse AI is, what that is something that's going to work directly with Xbox. So your older games will be able to move to new hardware and get visual upgrades thanks to this new AI, right? Well, this chatter that we're going to talk about comes the way of the announcement of Muse AI and how Microsoft is trying to utilize lots of different products and ideas across multiple disciplines. While this is the case with Muse, which could have a much wider implication at Microsoft more than just Xbox, Satya Nadella makes it clear that to be successful in gaming, you have to focus on great games, not just products like this. So here are a couple of quotes, and I'm going to hand it over to the panel and to the chat. Satya Nadella said this: gaming has got a long history at the company, and we want to be in gaming for gaming's sake. I hate it to be business where there's means to some other end. They have to be ends unto themselves. For example, cloud gaming is a natural thing for us to invest in because that's just what they're doing. It said, he goes on to say, expand the ability for people to play games everywhere. Same thing with AI in gaming. We definitely think that it can be helpful. And it does seem like AAA development, strong stories, strong characters, a strong presence, even though they're considered a now third party developer, one of the biggest publishers in gaming. I think it aligns. Let me get what you have to say about this, Silent.
With all of their stuff going the opposite way that anyone wants. No, so okay, I'll cover both and I'll try and be succinct with it. So the thing about the whole single player focus versus gaming as a service, we've seen what's happened to Sony. Sony used to be primarily single player focused experiences. They saw the money and the potential of doing something like a games as a service. They announced 12 to 13 of them, only a quarter of them remain, if that, after like a year or two since they originally announced their new strategy. So that tells you just by reading the room, obviously, the games as a service on its own is not sustainable just by itself. You have to have other options. Phil has always been told, like, hey, we want those single player experiences. We want to get to have those. We want to continue with those because a lot of people were like, no, that's going to go away. Single player experiences do not work in every scenario in a games as a service, and they're
Yep.
recognizing that. For me personally, I never got into Fallout 76 because I want to do my own thing. And initially that was not Fallout 76. I preferred the original mainline Fallout games, for example. Something like that with Elder Scrolls as well. Like the idea of having a bunch of friends in that probably appeals to some, not so much for me. I'd rather just dive in and ignore life and pretend like nothing else exists. So if I have some kid running around yelling at his mom to grab him some chocolate milk while I'm trying to do a quest, like that's not an experience I enjoy. So yeah, you look at their situation, and Microsoft is in a very unique situation at this point because they have enough money and they have enough studios that they can support both a single player and a games as a service approach. And you don't have to forfeit or sacrifice a certain game to one specific style. You know, you look at something like Twisted Metal with Sony, and could have been cool, except for they were going to try and do a games as a service. It didn't pan out, so they canned it. I would have loved to have another single player experience in the Twisted Metal universe, but they didn't want to hear that. All they saw was the money. And so you look at this situation where, like, you know, Microsoft can have their Candy Crushes, they can have their Elder Scrolls, they can have all these other things, but they can also focus on the single player stuff because they've made themselves big enough and they have enough structure between Game Pass and sales that they can make it financially viable and sustainable. And then on your second one, there's been a lot of people coming out about the AI thing and how it's a bad thing for many reasons. Be it, oh, it's going to take away voice acting, it's going to make it so people, you know, have bland games because you're just using AI to create the games instead and stuff. And Phil specified on this directly. He mentioned it when they were talking about it with get the other lady, but they were talking about how they were playing around with the AI and how it's not replacing the people and replacing the assets and stuff. It's making it so it's easier to build these games in a
Yes.
shorter time frame.
Yep.
Which that is something I think we've all said is like I've said multiple times. I wish we could go back to Xbox 360 generation where games were coming out constantly. Like you had multiple games in a franchise come out over the Xbox 360 lifespan. Versus nowadays, you get like one, maybe two games over a generation at best, and that's if you're lucky. So, you know, the idea of them being able to focus on the content, but be able to streamline it and make it so they can get stuff out faster, that's a win to me. Like if you can make it easier for devs, that cuts down your overall cost to make the game, which also helps them because maybe we won't see as big of layoffs if you don't have to spend that much on these processes. So I see the positive for it, and I see how it could be a really good thing. Um, you know, we'll see as time goes on what happens with it, but I think it's definitely a benefit, and if they can get it put into play, that would be a big win for them.
Did anyone on the panel or in the chat see that LA Noir side by side with the Muse? They showed a picture of what it looked like, and then they showed a picture of what the Muse AI did, and it looked in freaking incredible. Like I was like, "Holy crap! Are you kidding me? That's what they're going to be able to do." And that's what it apparently is going to. It's going to be able to bring these games not only from hardware that's that they're stuck on, but modernize them with their graphics, which is crazy. Uh, and again, nobody wants to see anybody get out of work. I know that with the AI stuff, it's tricky. It's a razor's edge that they're walking on. I'm glad that they're being very forthcoming and very down the middle. If you watch that 7-minute video that Phil put out regarding Muse AI about how they've sent it out to creators to use so they understand that it's not putting people out of job. It's simply assisting them on making games, doing things for them that were mundane during development. I think that's going to be great. We'll see what happens. Again, it's new territory, but again, great points all around. Corkenstein, let's talk about AAA development at Xbox, because one of the concerns with Xbox, quote unquote, going third party or multi-plat was that somehow they were going to lose identity, right? Somehow, because they're putting, and again, listen, I was there for a long time. I'm like, I would not put anything on Sony, but that's just my personal opinion, and I'm also an old man. I understand, and I've come around on it. Where, well, at this point, there ain't nothing I can do about it. So games are going to be going over. Has anything been taken away from me? The answer is no. And the more money they make on PlayStation, the more money they make on Switch. Same way with Steam, they're going to then reinvest into Xbox Game Pass. And between these two interviews, one with Phil, one with Satya, AAA development is at the core. And Satya Nadella literally said that in order for us to maintain being the world's largest publisher, we need to maintain AAA development. We need to keep making games that other people are going to want to play. So I think that really does clear up any misconception of, well, they're just going to be making games as fodder. No, if no one's going to buy the game on PlayStation if it isn't a good game. And is it going to release day and date? I have no idea. Is there going to be some sort of a lull, 3 months, 6 months, a year? I don't know the business because I'm not sitting in a room with them. But I'm interested to get your thoughts on both Phil's commentary regarding single player, because I think this is important. They are trying to be, and they already are, the biggest publisher. But what sells most on PlayStation? Single player, story driven games. What sells the most on Nintendo Switch and the Switch 2? Single player, fun family type games. Yes, there's multiplayer. They play Call of Duty. They play Fortnite. They play Apex Legends. They play PUBG. I get it. They play Marvel Rivals now. They do. They play it. Marvel Rivals blew up on PlayStation. That's not surprising at all. But the fact that we have confirmation that single player story driven content, AAA content, is still going to be made should really calm any of the concerns for what Xbox is going to do. What are your thoughts, man?
Yeah, it's just so frustrating because you can't have, what they have like 20 plus studios now, and people are
they have 30.
Yeah,
30. Yeah.
You're not going to make AAA games, and this is how can you have that many studios and not have AAA development? The fact that they had to even come out and say some of this is just, again, it's the same thing where Xbox says something, nobody listens. Xbox does something, and everybody's confused and mad and angry for stuff that they've already said. I mean, even still, some people took this the wrong way from Phil way back in the day when he already said, about multiplat, about legacy titles. People were like, "Oh no, that just means that games that are already on there and games that have already been made are staying on there." And it's like, no, I told a lot of people, I was like, no, I think he's pretty much talking about legacy titles like Doom, legacy titles like Elder Scrolls, like Fallout, like, those kind of titles are legacy IPs that have been everywhere for the longest time. But and then all of a sudden all this stuff comes out. Well, what do you mean multiplat? It's just frustrating that, they have to keep coming out and saying the same thing and doing the same thing over and over because content creators want to create different narratives that get them engagements and clicks. Same with the media. Gaming media here. It's I don't know. It's so frustrating to me to kind of hear this when it's been a standard for, it's been said numerous and multiple times. Yeah, I mean, yes, sure. I'll kind of push back a little bit on the point about single player games and stuff like that. Yeah, they sell, but do they continue revenue sales? No. That's your Marvel Rivals. That's your Call of Duty.
That's good point, man. Great point.
That's, but I mean, that's just Xbox has been their whole entire platform, which has set them up for success these last few years. Is they've diversified their portfolio. It's not the over the shoulder single player Hollywood blockbuster action adventure game that we've seen from other platform holders. And that's their only games that they have from those platform holders. Nintendo gets away with it. Again, Nintendo's the exception. They're not the norm. Nintendo has, 50 plus years of history, and, gamers that grew up on Nintendo now have kids, and those kids are now having kids. That's how long they've been in the business of games, and, creating toys and things like that. They've built nostalgia as a core part of their history. And, people, I remember playing, Mario, when I was a kid. So now you're going to play Mario when I was a kid. And now their parents are like, oh man, the new Mario is coming out. I'm going to have you play this to my kids. It's just a trickle down effect. And their development costs are not insanely low, but they're insanely low compared to the AAA development that's going on at other platform and studio holders. Their hardwares don't count as much. So I hate when people use that point, but what about Nintendo? It's so disingenuous because it's not one for one. on how that works. As far as the AI stuff goes, AI's become a dirty word. I heard you mention it. It's just become a dirty word that a lot of people automatically assume job loss. And that's with Muse, that's not the case. It's not this text box or chat box, like Grok or, Copilot, where it's like, make me a game. And then now you're going to have, the next Halo that's entirely developed by AI in, a matter of a minute. That's not the case. What this technology is, and I wish I had this as a QA tester, is it helps you with development, and you plug it in, it sees what it can do and if it'll work, and then you can kind of try and push it out. It saves a lot of the error of missing the mark and then having to waste all that time to come back and now fix it. It does a lot of really, really great stuff, but people hear procedural and they think it's creating games, and it's not the case. And it's frustrating when people get upset about it because we want less crunch time in the industry. Why are you making developers do all this stuff? And we need better conditions. And they're like, okay, well, here's Muse. This will help with some of the crunch time. Not like that. I don't want it like that. You guys are taking away jobs, and can't have both ways, guys. Like, you got to pick a lane and stay in it. It's just the bad faithers again that just, want to be outraged at something. But yeah, and then another thing too, why aren't, ports coming to Xbox? Why are these? Because the ROI in it. Now, when you have something like Muse, this makes it possible. This makes it where devs don't have to eat that overcost. Because let's be honest, backwards compatibility is great.
Yep.
But not a lot of developers are going to go back and try and redevelop a game and make it modern if it's not going to sell. And a lot of people don't want to go back. I mean, we've already seen the black hole development here of Call of Duty, Fallout, or not Fallout, Call of Duty, Fortnite. These games that are black holes essentially for gas, games that people just stay focused in. So not a lot of younger consumers are trying to go back and play these games, in which a lot of dev people realize, or there's not markets where they can go back in redevelopment because they weren't successful there or they weren't released in that market. I'm talking about a lot of these Japanese games were like Capcom, where you had the Marvel and things like that. Marvel and Monster Hunter, where stories I believe skipped Xbox, but it's like that wasn't the prime target, wasn't Xbox at the time. So you're not really going to get that heavy investment of people trying to develop that game to port on a system it was never made for and it was never actually done. But Muse, you can save some of that return of investment. So now more games can start coming that are port, and they're cheap to develop, not cheap, but they're more cost effective to develop for without making developers take the huge risk. This is a good thing for the industry. But of course, I get it. I understand the sentiment. You don't want AIs developing your games because it's going to take away jobs, and we can't trust companies to actually use the tools properly in good faith. I think what Muse is doing right now is great. We'll see what happens maybe in the future with it. If it develops into this massive monster that's really transformed the industry, who knows where it'll go from there. So I understand those concerns, but it's not a bad thing, guys. Right now, this is something good that's going to be great for consumers. It's going to be great for developers. It's another thing Xbox is pushing forward to make the industry better.
Yep.
And that's been Xbox's goal, and they've done an amazing job to put games first. And Phil even said it himself, that's kind of the goal right there.
I mean, it's a great point of view. I mean, look, one of the things I think that literally should jump off the page for you is game preservation, because they both said it, right? Game preservation. What does that mean to you? Well, if you're an old, well, not everybody's old as I am, but a lot of us can understand that the way it used to be back in the days is you'd be playing on said box, whether that's a TurboGrafx, whether that's an N64, whether that's a GameCube or PS1 or PS2, whatever, Dreamcast, pick your flavor. And when you moved into the next generation, right, I kept things plugged in because I'm a gamer, right? That's what I do. But most people took everything and either traded it in to Funkoland, right? Or EB Games, or now GameStop, if there's any still left, right? Or they took it and they put it in their closet in a box with all the games. And then we went and bought the new box. We plugged it in and we went, right? Fuzzy, I want to get your hot take on this, man. These are two mammoths in Xbox and Microsoft. I think what they had to say was incredibly impressive. What are your thoughts?
I think based on what they showed, used to be able to do, like a few people even mentioned it in the chat, as far as like the proof of concept kind of thing, instead of spending all the dev time working on something to realize, maybe that idea probably should have been left on the storyboard kind of thing. You can have it kind of spec out something and then go and work towards building that in normal coding. It gives you a rough idea of how things work. I mean, the closest thing I can think of as far as the industry I was in prior was like rapid prototypes. Like before, if you wanted to create, like, let's say you wanted to create an air intake for a car, you would have to do all these measurements, spec it out, build a rough build, and several times before you actually even got it to where it's to market, you've spent thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars and thousands of hours prototyping this. Now with rapid prototypes, you can go in was that CAD and other graphic programs, make the 3D render, tweak it a few times, do like maybe a like one of those, I forget what they call it now, but it was like a not a screen grab, but you're scanning the vehicle with like a 3D scanner, and then you can actually make sure everything fits. Do the rapid prototype out of plastic, not the normal production plastic. Pop it in there. Oh, it fits. Well, maybe we can run some test numbers, not generate too much heat because this isn't the full production stuff. And you're a lot closer to market, and then you can send that to your tooling team and then have it ready. So it saves you usually 6 months to a year in prototyping on a product. So this could do the same for games where the cost is going through the freaking roof, where we see games like Spider-Man was what, 300 mil,
$315 million for that, bro. That was even before that was, and please, I want to just elaborate on that. $315 million for production of the game before you get to advertising.
Yeah,
that's crazy. And Spider-Man 3 is projected to be $425 million, which I think they're going to cut that game in half just based on that.
Yeah, they already talked about doing like 3 parts, so it's like they can almost sell you 3 full games or kind of pseudo full games. Maybe they do it at 50 or 60 instead of 70, but in any event, that was the way that they would have to recoup all of that cost. If you have this to kind of cut down some of that production time, I think, I'm not saying it's going to save hundreds of millions, but it definitely can save enough money to the point where you don't have to see these layoffs immediately after a project, or the amount of layoffs that you would have for ramping up to build these prototypes of these builds and then realize, oh, well, we're going to go in another direction, save that for the cutting floor kind of thing. So this is a good step moving forward, and hopefully they use these tools as additional tools or additive stuff, as opposed to in place thereof, which it doesn't seem like this particular use of AI would be in place of. But I think the other, on the flip side of the coin, this actually makes it even potentially easier if it's a reasonable expense, where an independent developer can have a lot bigger game in comparison to what they would be able to do on their own or with a smaller team, because of these additional tools, making the indie scene even bigger and better than what it is. And we've seen some of the improvements in the indie scene with things like, was it 33 Expedition and quite a few other smaller games that I don't think we would have seen 10, 15 years ago, just based on the scale of what they're able to do. So I look forward to it. But once again, the trust in these companies is at an all-time low because shareholders rule everything, type of deal. But that's a great tool to add to what these dev teams can do. And I like the fact that if it makes gaming easier for the devs, then that makes it easier for us gamers to get more games in hand. Although it screws us up on time and which game to play first. But in the grand scheme of things, I'd much rather have that option, or that dilemma of picking which game to play as opposed to hearing about how a game is delayed X amount of years or it's through the roof in cost and now there's 1,000 layoffs or whatever after the fact. So hopefully this is put to good use. Hopefully we see the benefits here sooner rather than later. And, with Satya and Phil, making the statements on how they're committed to gaming and in the ways in which they're committed to gaming, and not just, I know a lot of people don't want to hear about the focus on the singular box or how they're moving beyond that type of deal. But I think in the grand scheme of things, we'll have more games to play, more access for gamers in general. And if we can get past the old traditional thoughts of how the market used to work, I think we'll be better forward, just in the fact that you'll have more things to choose from, more things to play, more options on what to play them on. And that can't hurt. I mean, I'm benefiting from it with being able to play Xbox games on my Quest, on my Steam Deck, my PC, and my console, or even my phone if I choose. So you can't beat that type of access these days.